It was 3:47 a.m. on a Wednesday night when Marcus Sterling realized that everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed for, everything he had built his entire identity around, was slowly killing him from the inside out. And if you've ever laid awake at night staring at the ceiling wondering if this is really all there is to life, if you've ever felt successful on paper but completely empty in your soul, then you'll understand exactly what Marcus was experiencing in that moment, when success stopped feeling like success and started feeling like the most expensive prison he had ever built for himself. Marcus had just closed the biggest deal of his career, acquisition that would add another $2 billion to his already staggering fortune. The kind of deal that business schools would study for decades, the kind of achievement that should have felt like the pinnacle of everything he had been working toward for the past 20 years. Yet, as he sat alone in his penthouse office at nearly 4 a.m., surrounded by contracts worth more money than most countries see in a year, he felt absolutely nothing. No joy, no satisfaction, no sense of accomplishment. Just a hollow emptiness that seemed to grow larger with every zero added to his net worth. The irony wasn't lost on him that he owned 3 homes but never felt at home anywhere, that he had thousands of employees but no real friends, that he could buy anything he wanted but couldn't purchase the one thing his soul was desperately craving, a sense of meaning, a reason to wake up that went beyond profit margins and quarterly reports and board meetings filled with people who smiled to his face while calculating how they could use him for their own advancement. If you've ever felt like you're living someone else's definition of success while your own heart slowly dies, hit that like button, because what happened to Marcus next will challenge everything you think you know about what it means to truly win in life. The night everything changed started like every other night for the past 5 years, with Marcus working until his eyes burned from staring at screens, until his back ached from hunching over spreadsheets, until his mind was so saturated with numbers and strategies and competitive analysis that he couldn't remember the last time he had a thought that wasn't related to business. And this wasn't dedication, this was obsession, this wasn't success, this was addiction to a drug called achievement that promised fulfillment but delivered only the need for more achievement, more recognition from people whose opinions shouldn't have mattered but somehow controlled his entire sense of self-worth. Marcus had become a prisoner of his own success, trapped in a cycle where each accomplishment only raised the bar higher, where each milestone reached only revealed another mountain to climb, where each goal achieved only exposed how empty the achievement actually felt. And the worst part was that everyone around him saw him as the ultimate winner while he knew he was actually losing the only game that really mattered, the game of being human, of being connected, of being alive in any way that felt authentic or meaningful or real. The penthouse that was supposed to represent his triumph felt more like an ivory tower that isolated him from real life. The private jet that was supposed to give him freedom felt more like a gilded cage that carried him from one meaningless meeting to another. The respect that was supposed to validate his worth felt more like fear from people who wanted something from him. And Marcus realized that somewhere along the way, he had stopped being a person and started being a brand, stopped living and started performing, stopped feeling and started calculating. And this transformation had happened so gradually that he didn't even notice he was disappearing until one night when he looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back at him. That Wednesday night was different because Marcus had finally reached the point where even his usual coping mechanisms weren't working anymore. The expensive whiskey tasted like ash in his mouth. The view from his office windows looked like a prison yard. The congratulatory messages from business partners felt like mockery. And for the first time in his adult life, Marcus allowed himself to ask the question he had been avoiding for years. What was the point of any of this? What was he actually building? What was he actually achieving? And what would happen if he stopped running long enough to face the emptiness that was growing inside him like a cancer that no amount of money could cure? The breaking point came when Marcus tried to call someone, anyone, to share his biggest professional victory with. And as he scrolled through his contacts, he realized that every single person in his phone was either an employee, a business partner, a competitor, or someone who wanted something from him. And there wasn't a single person he could call at 3 a.m. just to talk, just to be heard, just to share a moment of genuine human connection without some underlying transaction or agenda or expectation. And this realization hit him like a physical blow because it meant that despite all his networking and relationship building and social capital accumulation, he was completely and utterly alone. Marcus sat in his leather chair that cost more than most people's cars and tried to remember the last time he had laughed. Really laughed. Not the polite chuckle he performed in meetings or the strategic laughter he used to build rapport with clients, but genuine laughter that came from joy rather than calculation, and he couldn't remember. He tried to remember the last time he had felt excited about something that wasn't related to money or power or status, and he couldn't remember. He tried to remember the last time he had done something kind for another person without expecting anything in return, and the silence in his mind was deafening. The success that was supposed to give him options had actually eliminated all his options except the option to keep succeeding. The wealth that was supposed to give him freedom had actually enslaved him to the lifestyle that wealth required. The power that was supposed to give him control had actually made him completely dependent on maintaining that power. And Marcus realized that he had traded his soul for success and gotten exactly what he paid for. Everything except the thing that actually mattered. Comment below if you've ever felt trapped by your own achievements, because what Marcus discovered in that moment of brutal honesty would change not just his life but his entire understanding of what life is actually for. The prison Marcus had built wasn't made of bars or walls. It was made of expectations, obligations, responsibilities, and commitments that had seemed like stepping stones when he was climbing up but now felt like chains keeping him locked in a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt like death on the inside. And the most terrifying part was that everyone expected him to be grateful for this prison. Everyone envied his cage. Everyone wanted to trade places with him without understanding that he would have traded places with almost anyone just to feel human again, just to feel connected, just to feel like his life had meaning beyond the accumulation of wealth and power and status symbols that impressed strangers but left him completely empty. Marcus had mastered the art of making money, but had completely forgotten the art of making meaning, had become an expert at building businesses, but had no idea how to build a life worth living, had learned how to influence thousands of people, but had lost the ability to connect with a single human being in any authentic way. And that night, sitting alone in his temple to material success, Marcus finally admitted to himself what he had been trying to ignore for years. He was successful, respected, wealthy, powerful, and absolutely miserable. Living a life that looked like winning but felt like the most sophisticated form of losing imaginable, and something had to change before the emptiness consumed what was left of his humanity. What happened next isn't something Marcus talks about easily, and if you're the kind of person who dismisses anything that can't be measured or quantified or explained by conventional logic, you might be tempted to skip this part, but I'm telling you that what you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about reality, about consciousness, about the forces that shape our lives in ways we can't see but can definitely feel. And if you've ever had a moment where you knew something was true even though you couldn't prove it, where you felt guided by something beyond your rational mind, where you experienced something that science can't explain but your soul recognizes as absolutely real, then you'll understand that what Marcus experienced that night wasn't a hallucination or a breakdown or wishful thinking. It was an encounter with something that exists beyond the material world that had consumed his entire adult life. It was 4:23 a.m. when Marcus heard it for the first time, not with his ears but with something deeper, something he didn't even know he possessed after years of numbing himself with work and achievement and the endless pursuit of more. And the voice didn't announce itself with fanfare or dramatic effects or any of the theatrics you might expect from movies or books about spiritual experiences. It was quiet, gentle, almost whisper-soft, but it carried a weight and authority that made every cell in his body pay attention, every thought in his mind go silent, every defense mechanism he had built around his heart suddenly feel completely useless and unnecessary. The first thing the voice said wasn't what Marcus expected, wasn't a condemnation of his lifestyle or a lecture about his priorities or a judgment about his choices. It was something far more personal and devastating and beautiful than anything his rational mind could have anticipated. I know who you really are, Marcus, and I know you've forgotten, but I remember the boy who wanted to change the world, who cared more about people than profit, who believed that success meant making life better for others, not just for yourself. And that boy is still in there, buried under years of compromise and competition and the relentless pursuit of validation from people who don't even know your real name. Marcus felt something break open inside his chest. something that had been locked away for so long he had forgotten it existed. And suddenly he was crying, not the controlled, strategic tears he had learned to use in negotiations when emotion could be leveraged for advantage, but raw, uncontrollable sobs that came from a place deeper than his ambition, deeper than his fear, deeper than his need to maintain the image of the invincible businessman who had conquered every challenge the market could throw at him. The voice continued, and Marcus realized that this wasn't a conversation he was having, this was a conversation that was having him, pulling truth out of him that he had spent decades trying to bury. You built this empire thinking it would make you powerful, but you gave away your power to every person whose approval you sought. You accumulated wealth thinking it would make you free, but you became a slave to the very system you thought you were mastering. You achieved everything you thought you wanted, and lost everything you actually needed. And now you're sitting in a tower made of achievements that feel like tombstones, wondering why victory tastes like defeat, and why winning feels like the most sophisticated way of losing you've ever experienced. Hit that like button if you've ever felt like you were winning at the wrong game, because what the voice told Marcus next reveals the lie that our entire culture is built on, and once you hear this truth, you'll never be able to unsee it. The voice wasn't finished, and Marcus felt like he was being turned inside out. Like every defense he had built, every story he had told himself about why his life made sense, every justification he had created for the emptiness he felt was being gently but relentlessly dismantled. You think success means having more than others, but real success means becoming more than you were yesterday. You think wealth means accumulating resources, but true wealth means knowing you have everything you need. You think power means controlling outcomes, but authentic power means surrendering to purposes greater than your own comfort. And you've spent so many years chasing shadows that you've forgotten what substance feels like. So many years performing that you've forgotten what authenticity feels like. So many years competing that you've forgotten what collaboration feels like. Marcus tried to argue, tried to defend the life he had built, tried to explain that he had responsibilities, obligations, people depending on him. But the voice cut through his rationalizations like they were made of paper. You have responsibilities, but not the ones you think. You have obligations, but not to the system that's slowly killing your soul. You have people depending on you, but they're not the ones in your boardroom. They're the ones you could help if you stopped hoarding resources and started sharing them. They're the ones you could inspire if you stopped hiding behind your success and started living your truth. They're the ones who need to see that it's possible to choose meaning over money, purpose over profit, service over set. The conversation, if you could call it that, lasted for hours, though Marcus would later realize that time seemed to work differently during this encounter, that minutes felt like hours and hours felt like minutes, that he was experiencing something outside the normal flow of chronological time, something that existed in the eternal present where truth lives, where authenticity resides, where the real business of being human actually takes place. And during those hours, Marcus felt like he was being shown his life from a completely different perspective, like he was seeing himself through the eyes of something infinitely compassionate but also infinitely honest. The voice showed him moments from his past that he had forgotten or ignored, moments when he had chosen money over integrity, moments when he had chosen image over authenticity, moments when he had chosen competition over collaboration, and each memory felt like a small death, a recognition of how far he had drifted from the person he had originally intended to become. But the voice wasn't showing him these moments to shame him. It was showing him these moments to remind him that he still had choices, that it wasn't too late to change direction, that redemption was always possible for someone willing to face the truth about themselves and act on that truth regardless of the cost. Your wealth isn't the problem, the voice continued. Your attachment to your wealth is the problem. Your success isn't the issue. Your identity being dependent on your success is the issue. Your achievements aren't wrong. Your need for your achievements to define your worth is what's killing you. And until you understand the difference between having something and being owned by something, between using resources and being used by resources, between accumulating wealth and being accumulated by wealth, you'll continue to feel empty no matter how much you acquire. Marcus felt like he was being completely reconstructed, like every assumption he had made about life, about success, about what it means to be human was being examined and found wanting. And the strangest part was that this process didn't feel destructive. It felt liberating. like he was finally being allowed to take off a costume he had been wearing for so long. He had forgotten it wasn't his real skin. The most powerful moment came when the voice asked him a question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Marcus said, "If you died tomorrow, what would you be remembered for beyond your net worth? What impact would you have made beyond your financial statements? What legacy would you leave beyond the empire you built?" And if the answer is nothing, if the only thing people would remember about you is how much money you made, then what was the point of your entire existence? What was the purpose of all the gifts you were given, all the opportunities you were presented with, all the potential that was placed inside you that you used only to accumulate resources rather than to serve something greater than yourself? Comment below and tell me what you would want to be remembered for if you died tomorrow, because Marcus's answer to this question would change everything, would set in motion a series of events that would shock everyone who knew him and inspire everyone who heard his story. The final thing the voice said before the encounter ended was both the most terrifying and the most liberating thing Marcus had ever heard. You have a choice to make, and this choice will determine not just the rest of your life but the kind of person you become, the kind of legacy you leave, the kind of impact you make on the world. You can continue living the life everyone expects you to live, the life that looks successful but feels empty, the life that impresses strangers but disappoints your soul. Or you can choose to live the life you were actually created to live, the life that serves something greater than your own comfort, the life that uses your resources to lift others rather than just to elevate yourself, the life that measures success not by what you accumulate but by what you contribute. And this choice must be made not with your mind, which will give you 1,000 reasons why change is impossible, but with your heart, which already knows what you need to do even if you're afraid to do it. As dawn broke over the city, Marcus sat in his office chair feeling like he had been through the most intense therapy session, the most profound philosophical discussion, the most transformative spiritual experience of his entire life, and he knew that nothing would ever be the same, that he couldn't unknow what he now knew, couldn't unfeel what he had felt, couldn't go back to pretending that his current life was working when he now understood exactly how and why it was slowly destroying everything that actually mattered about being human. And the voice had given him a choice that would require either the courage to change everything or the cowardice to ignore everything. And Marcus realized that this moment would define not just his future but his fundamental character as a human being. Most people would have dismissed what Marcus experienced as stress-induced hallucination, as the product of too many sleepless nights and too much pressure, as their mind playing tricks on them during a moment of vulnerability. And honestly, Marcus's first instinct was to do exactly that, to rationalize away the most profound experience of his adult life, to reduce it to something explainable, something manageable, something that wouldn't require him to question everything he had built his identity around. Because that's what successful people do when confronted with truth that threatens their carefully constructed worldview. They explain it away, they minimize it. They find reasons why they don't need to change, why they can continue living the same life while somehow expecting different results. But here's what made Marcus different from most people who receive these kinds of wake-up calls. And if you've ever had a moment where you knew you were being called to something greater but talked yourself out of it, if you've ever felt the pull toward a more authentic life but convinced yourself it was impractical or impossible or too risky, then you need to understand what separated Marcus from the millions of people who get these same invitations to transformation but choose comfort over courage, familiarity over freedom, the known emptiness over the unknown possibility of fulfillment. Marcus chose to listen because he had reached what psychologists call a point of optimal disillusionment, that precise moment when the pain of staying the same finally exceeded the fear of change, when the cost of maintaining his current life became higher than the cost of completely reinventing it, when the suffering of success became more unbearable than the uncertainty of surrender. And this is a rare and precious moment in any person's life, because most people never reach this point. Most people find ways to make their pain tolerable, to numb their emptiness, to distract themselves from their own inner voice, calling them towards something more authentic and meaningful. The first reason Marcus chose to listen was because he had tried everything else. And when I say everything, I mean everything that money could buy, everything that success could provide, everything that the world told him would make him happy, and none of it worked. Not the therapists who told him he just needed better work-life balance, not the life coaches who helped him optimize his productivity, not the spiritual gurus who sold him meditation techniques like business strategies, not the retreats in exotic locations where he networked with other successful people who were just as empty as he was, not the relationships with people who were attracted to his wealth rather than his character, not the hobbies he pursued to fill time rather than to fill his soul. And after exhausting every external solution to his internal problem, Marcus was finally ready to consider that maybe the problem wasn't with his circumstances, but with his entire approach to living. Hit that like button if you've ever tried to solve a spiritual problem with material solutions, because what Marcus discovered about why most people ignore their inner calling will make you question everything you think you know about courage and fear. The second reason Marcus chose to listen was because he had witnessed what happens to people who don't listen, and his world was full of cautionary tales. Billionaires who had committed suicide despite having everything money could buy, CEOs who had died of stress-related illnesses while building empires they never got to enjoy, entrepreneurs who had achieved massive success while destroying their families, their health, and their capacity for joy. And Marcus realized that he was looking at his own future if he continued on his current trajectory, that he was becoming one of those people who would be eulogized for their achievements, while everyone who really knew them understood that they had died long before their funeral, that they had traded their souls for success and spent their final years as walking ghosts, haunting their own lives. Marcus also chose to listen because he remembered who he used to be, and this might be the most important point of all. Because the voice hadn't introduced him to a stranger, it had reminded him of himself, of the young man who had gone into business not to get rich but to solve problems, not to accumulate wealth but to create value, not to dominate markets but to serve customers, and somewhere along the way, that young man had been buried under layers of cynicism, competition, and compromise. But he wasn't dead, he was just sleeping, waiting for someone to wake him up, waiting for permission to care about more than profit margins, waiting for an invitation to remember what he had originally wanted his life to mean. The voice had offered him something that all his money couldn't buy, the possibility of becoming himself again, the chance to align his external success with his internal values, the opportunity to use his resources for purposes that would outlast his lifetime. And Marcus realized that this was what he had been searching for in every achievement, every acquisition, every accolade. He had been trying to find his authentic self through external validation, when his authentic self was only accessible through internal recognition, through the courage to admit that he had lost his way and the willingness to find his way back to who he really was. Another crucial reason Marcus chose to listen was because he understood that this kind of invitation doesn't come often, and maybe only comes once in a lifetime, that there are moments when the universe, or God, or consciousness, or whatever you want to call the force that governs meaning and purpose, offers us a chance to course correct, to redirect our lives towards something that actually matters. And these moments are precious and fragile and easily missed if we're too busy, too scared, too invested in our current identity to recognize them for what they are. Opportunities for transformation that most people spend their entire lives waiting for, without realizing that the waiting itself is what prevents the opportunity from arriving. Marcus also chose to listen because he had nothing left to lose. And this might sound strange coming from someone who had billions of dollars, but Marcus understood that when you've achieved everything the world told you to want, and you're still miserable, you haven't actually achieved anything meaningful. You've just accumulated stuff. And stuff can be replaced, stuff can be given away, stuff can be lost without losing anything essential. But what can't be replaced is time, and what can't be recovered is a life spent chasing the wrong things. And Marcus realized that he was running out of time to live authentically, running out of opportunities to make his life mean something beyond his bank account balance. The most profound reason Marcus chose to listen was because he recognized truth when he heard it, and truth has a quality that's unmistakable once you've experienced it. It resonates in your bones. It makes everything else seem like noise. It cuts through all the rationalizations and justifications and explanations you've created to avoid facing reality. And the truth the voice had spoken to him wasn't new information. It was information he had always known but had spent years trying to forget, trying to bury, trying to numb with success and achievement and the endless pursuit of more. Marcus chose to listen because he was tired, not just physically tired from working too much, but soul tired from living inauthentically, tired of pretending that his life made sense when it didn't, tired of performing happiness when he felt empty, tired of being respected for achievements that felt meaningless, tired of being envied for a life that felt like a prison, tired of being seen as successful when he felt like a failure at the only thing that really mattered, being human, in a way that felt genuine and connected and purposeful. Comment below if you've ever felt tired of living someone else's definition of success, because Marcus's decision to listen would soon lead to actions that would shock everyone who knew him and inspire everyone who heard his story. Marcus also chose to listen because he understood that ignoring the voice would be a form of spiritual suicide, that continuing to live a life that violated his deepest values would eventually kill whatever was left of his authentic self, that he could continue to accumulate wealth and achievements while slowly dying inside, becoming one of those people who look successful from the outside while being completely hollow on the inside. And Marcus had seen enough of those people to know that this wasn't just a philosophical concern. It was a real and immediate danger to his humanity, to his capacity for love, to his ability to experience joy, to his connection with anything that made life worth living. The final reason Marcus chose to listen was perhaps the simplest and most profound. He chose to listen because the voice was offering him love, not the conditional love that depended on his achievements, not the transactional love that required him to provide something in return, not the performance-based love that disappeared when he stopped being useful, but unconditional love that saw him as valuable simply because he existed, that recognized his worth independent of his wealth, that appreciated his potential beyond his current accomplishments. And Marcus realized that this was what he had been searching for his entire adult life. Not more money or more power or more recognition, but more love, more connection, more sense of being known and valued for who he was rather than what he had. And the voice was offering him the opportunity to experience this love, not just as a recipient, but as a channel, to become someone who could offer others the same unconditional acceptance and support that he was now receiving. Marcus chose to listen because he finally understood that the voice wasn't asking him to give up his life. It was asking him to start living his life, not asking him to abandon success, but to redefine success, not asking him to become poor, but to understand what true wealth actually means, not asking him to diminish himself, but to become the fullest expression of who he was created to be. And this wasn't a sacrifice, this was an invitation to the most abundant life imaginable, a life where external resources served internal values, where material wealth supported spiritual wealth, where personal achievement contributed to collective flourishing, where individual success participated in universal purpose. And Marcus realized that this was what he had been preparing for his entire career without knowing it, that all his skills, all his resources, all his influence could finally be used for something that would outlast his lifetime and outweigh his bank account in terms of actual significance and lasting impact on the world. Marcus's story isn't really about Marcus at all. It's about you, it's about me, it's about every single person who has ever felt that quiet whisper in their soul telling them that there's more to life than what they're currently living, that they're capable of more than what they're currently doing, that they were created for something greater than what they're currently pursuing. And if you're honest with yourself, if you're willing to acknowledge what you already know but have been trying to ignore, you've heard this voice too. Maybe not as dramatically as Marcus did, maybe not in the middle of a crisis of success, but you've heard it, you've felt it, you've experienced those moments when something deep inside you says this isn't it, this isn't what you're supposed to be doing with your life, this isn't who you're supposed to be, this isn't how you're supposed to be living. And the question isn't whether you've heard the voice, the question is what you've done with it, how you've responded to it, whether you've listened to it or ignored it, followed it or run from it, embraced it or explained it away. The uncomfortable truth that Marcus's experience reveals is that we all have access to the same wisdom, the same guidance, the same inner knowing that connected him to his authentic purpose. But most of us are too scared to listen because listening would require us to admit that our current life isn't working, that our current priorities are wrong, that our current definition of success is actually a sophisticated form of failure. And this admission is terrifying because it means acknowledging that we might need to change everything, that we might need to disappoint people who have expectations about who we should be, that we might need to walk away from investments we've made in an identity that isn't actually ours. And most people would rather live inauthentically than face the uncertainty that comes with authentic living. The voice that Marcus heard isn't unique to billionaires or successful people or people in crisis. It's the same voice that speaks to the single mother, working 3 jobs, who knows she's meant to be an artist. The same voice that speaks to the corporate lawyer who dreams of teaching children. The same voice that speaks to the accountant who feels called to ministry. The same voice that speaks to the doctor who wants to write novels. The same voice that speaks to the teacher who envisions starting a non-profit. The same voice that speaks to every person who has ever felt the gap between who they are and who they're pretending to be. Between what they're doing and what they're meant to do. Between the life they're living and the life they know they're capable of living. But here's what makes Marcus's story so powerful and so challenging. He had every excuse not to listen. Every rational reason to ignore the voice and continue living his successful but empty life. He had more to lose than most people ever accumulate. More people depending on him. More expectations to fulfill. More reasons why change would be impractical or impossible or irresponsible. Yet he chose to listen anyway. He chose courage over comfort, authenticity over approval, purpose over profit. And his choice forces us to examine our own excuses, our own rationalizations, our own reasons for not following the voice that's been calling us toward a more meaningful existence. Hit that like button if you've ever made excuses for not following your deepest calling. Because what I'm about to share will challenge every justification you've created for living smaller than you know you're capable of living. The voice we all hear isn't asking us to become billionaires who give away fortunes. It's asking us to become the fullest expression of who we were created to be, to use whatever resources we have, whatever talents we possess, whatever platform we've been given to serve something greater than our own comfort, our own security, our own need for approval. And this might mean leaving a job that pays well but kills your soul. It might mean starting a business that serves others rather than just enriches yourself. It might mean using your skills for causes you believe in rather than just for causes that pay well. It might mean having difficult conversations with people who won't understand your transformation. It might mean living more simply so you can give more generously. It might mean choosing relationships based on authenticity rather than convenience. It might mean prioritizing meaning over money, purpose over prestige, service over status. The reason most people ignore the voice isn't because they can't hear it. It's because they're afraid of what listening might cost them. Afraid of losing the life they've built, even if that life doesn't actually fulfill them. Afraid of disappointing people whose approval they've become addicted to, even if those people don't really know or love them. Afraid of stepping into the unknown, even if the known is slowly killing their spirit. Afraid of being authentic, even if being inauthentic is making them miserable. And this fear is understandable, because transformation is terrifying. But what's even more terrifying is reaching the end of your life and realizing that you never actually lived it. That you spent your entire existence performing someone else's idea of success while ignoring your own soul's definition of fulfillment. Marcus's transformation reveals something crucial about the nature of the voice we all hear. It's not asking us to abandon responsibility. It's asking us to take responsibility for the life we're actually living rather than the life everyone expects us to live. It's not asking us to be irresponsible with our resources. It's asking us to be responsible to our purpose. It's not asking us to ignore our obligations. It's asking us to examine whether our obligations are authentic or just habits we've developed to avoid the risk of living authentically. And this examination is uncomfortable because it reveals how much of our lives we've organized around other people's expectations rather than our own values, around external validation rather than internal fulfillment, around the need to look successful rather than the desire to be meaningful. The voice that speaks to all of us isn't the voice of religion necessarily. Though it might be, it's not the voice of any particular tradition or belief system. Though it might speak through those channels, it's the voice of truth, the voice of authenticity, the voice of love, the voice of purpose, the voice of everything in us that knows we were created for more than accumulation, more than achievement, more than the endless pursuit of approval from people who don't even know our real names. And this voice is always available, always present, always ready to guide us toward a life that feels as good from the inside as it looks from the outside. Toward work that energizes rather than drains us, toward relationships that nourish rather than deplete us, toward a sense of purpose that makes every day feel like a gift rather than a burden. Comment below and tell me about a time when you heard your inner voice but chose not to listen. because recognizing these moments is the first step toward having the courage to listen the next time the voice calls your name. The tragedy isn't that people don't hear the voice. The tragedy is that most people hear it clearly, but choose to live as if they're deaf. Choose to continue building lives that look impressive from the outside, while feeling empty from the inside. Choose to pursue success that doesn't actually succeed at making them happy, fulfilled, or connected to anything that matters beyond their own ego, their own image, their own need to appear as if they have everything figured out when they know they're just as lost as everyone else, who's trying to find meaning in a culture that mistakes accumulation for abundance, achievement for fulfillment, recognition for love. What Marcus discovered, and what each of us must discover in our own way, is that the voice isn't trying to make our lives harder. It's trying to make our lives real. It's not trying to take away our success. It's trying to redefine success in ways that actually satisfy the human soul. It's not trying to diminish our achievements. It's trying to ensure that our achievements contribute to something larger than our own advancement, something more lasting than our own lifetime, something more significant than our own bank account. And this isn't sacrifice. This is the path to the kind of abundance that money can't buy, the kind of wealth that doesn't fluctuate with market conditions, the kind of success that doesn't depend on other people's opinions or approval. The voice that Marcus heard, and that each of us hears, is offering us the same thing: the opportunity to trade a life of performance for a life of authenticity, a life of accumulation for a life of contribution, a life of competition for a life of collaboration, a life of taking for a life of giving, a life of fear for a life of love. And this trade isn't just available to billionaires, or people in crisis, or people with nothing left to lose. It's available to anyone who has the courage to admit that their current life isn't working, that their current priorities don't actually serve their deepest values, that their current definition of success doesn't actually produce the kind of satisfaction they thought it would, that their current way of living is keeping them from becoming the person they were created to be. The question Marcus's story poses to each of us isn't whether we've heard the voice, because we all have. The question is whether we'll have the courage to listen, whether we'll choose authenticity over approval, whether we'll prioritize purpose over profit, whether we'll risk the known emptiness for the unknown possibility of fulfillment, whether we'll trade the illusion of security for the reality of meaning, whether we'll stop living someone else's life and start living our own. And this choice isn't theoretical or someday, or when conditions are perfect. This choice is available right now, in this moment, with whatever resources you currently have, whatever circumstances you're currently in, whatever challenges you're currently facing, because the voice doesn't wait for perfect conditions to call your name. It calls your name in the middle of imperfect conditions and asks whether you're ready to start living as if your life actually matters, as if your choices actually make a difference, as if you were actually created for something more significant than just getting through another day, earning another dollar, achieving another milestone that will leave you just as empty as you were before you achieved it. Marcus walked away from billions because he finally understood that no amount of money could purchase what the voice was offering him for free: the chance to live authentically, to serve meaningfully, to love unconditionally, to contribute significantly, to matter eternally. And this same opportunity is extended to every person watching this video, regardless of your current net worth, regardless of your current circumstances, regardless of your current level of success or failure. Because the voice that calls us toward authentic living doesn't discriminate based on our achievements. It only asks whether we're ready to stop pretending that external success can fill internal voids, whether we're ready to stop chasing achievements that achieve nothing meaningful, whether we're ready to start living the life we were actually created to live, rather than the life everyone else expects us to live. And the time to make this choice isn't someday when everything is perfect. The time to make this choice is now, while you still have time to become who you were always meant to be.